Welcome back to H4Games. I'm your host Tony, and today we have a prototype of Pac-Man World 2 for the Game Boy Advance. Now, unlike other prototypes that we've looked at in the past, where there were some minor differences between the retail version and the prototype version, this thing is very, very unfinished. So yes, this time there are actually differences. Meaningful differences that we can talk about. Really, this thing is so early that there are a lot of elements here that aren't really even like beta elements. They're really more so just placeholders, like placeholders everywhere. Some of them are pretty ridiculous. So we're going to talk about the cart first, then the game itself, what is Pac-Man World 2 for the Game Boy Advance, and then we're going to talk about the differences between what we have here and the actual retail version of the game. So here it is, and obviously Game Boy Advance carts are super tiny, so instead of this whole thing sticking out of a tiny Game Boy Advance cart, what we have is more akin to a Game Boy or Game Boy Color cartridge with this board sticking out of it. Interestingly though, it is actually not a Game Boy Color or Game Boy cartridge because you can put it into a DS and it plays and it fits perfectly fine. It just looks like a Game Boy Color cart. Obviously, they chose to do this because they needed a little bit more room to create a sturdy base for this very tall board. And it would look really weird to have this sticking out of this. So on the back here, we have PMW2, Pac-Man World 2, and then the date of the build, 4/15. Now, for reference, the retail version was released in Europe on August 19th, 2005, and it was released in North America on October 9th, 2005. So this is the date of the build, unless of course they put Pac-Man World 2 on it on this date and then flashed over it again with a different version, which of course is entirely possible because you've probably noticed by now that the front actually says Klonoa. So yeah, this cart was actually used for the Game Boy Advance version of Klonoa, which would have actually been really awesome to see. Now, I don't have the first Klonoa game, but I do have the second one and the WonderSwan version that was used as a basis for the Game Boy Advance port. So it actually would have been really cool to see, you know, a prototype beta version of Klonoa on the Game Boy Advance as they're transitioning it from the WonderSwan. I don't know, I just kind of have a soft spot for it. So we have the flash memory here, and of course we have the dip switches here. Let's talk about the game itself. What is Pac-Man World 2? If you've never played it, it's a reimagining of the GameCube/PS2 title of the same name. It's a platformer where Pac-Man has to collect dots, fruit, double bounce, spin attack, spin dash, sort of spin dash. It's very similar to Sonic in that way. And basically every combination thereof to progress from level to level. It's an okay game. The controls take a little bit of getting used to though, and there are definitely some flaws. A few examples of these flaws. Let's go ahead and start with the movement. So this is the third time I actually beat this level while recording footage, and this long jump still took me about 15 tries. Really, the big issue is perspective here. It's a 2D platformer, but your platforms have depth, so spatial awareness is really difficult, and I'm playing this on an emulator. Imagine playing it on a tiny Game Boy Advance screen, trying to make sense of like where you are in the world depth-wise. When the controls work, and Pac-Man does what you want him to, it feels really, really good. But when the controls don't work, it kind of just feels like a slightly better version of Sonic 3D Blast. So what I've been showing you here is the tutorial level. Let's take a look at the same level in the alpha build. So much to say here, so much of the detail that's essentially been stripped away. The fruit is different. The fruit pops up on screen, like in Yoshi's Story almost. Take a look at these boxes here. Take a look at this button. The logo is basically just gone. And look at the enemies. They look like they were made in MS Paint, and I'm not exaggerating here. They look legitimately like they were made in MS Paint and plopped in. It is awesome. Now, of course, obviously these are placeholders here, so you can kind of just imagine, you know, one of the artists is like, okay, I gotta make a, monster, here you go, monster, here you go, and it's just like a silly little drawing that they created just for the time being, and it kind of, I don't know, I just think it's kind of neat to see, you know, kind of puts you in their mindset of how they were working and what they were working on, and, you know, they made it a little bit fun for themselves. Now here's the hub world in the retail version. Here's the hub in the prototype. You can just walk around a dark, glitch-filled world. Pressing R on a level changes what checkpoint you start on, which is kind of cool. And watch this, if you walk past every level, you auto sprint back to the beginning and the player loses all control of the character. He's just like sort of on this unending auto run. If you press select, coordinates will pop up and you can kind of see where Pac-Man is. Pressing L allows you to free roam the camera on a 2D plane. Now this is the same as the retail version, but the prototype version is more buggy. So for example, you can see here in the retail version, I can kind of slide the camera and it stops nicely, slide the camera, it stops nicely. In the prototype version, you kind of slide the camera and it kind of shakes a little bit. It goes to the other side and it kind of shakes a little bit. Just a little bit buggy. Let's take a look at a few more levels here. Here's the forest level. Got the bumpers here again. And again, just the detail was stripped away. Well, it wasn't stripped away, it just wasn't there yet. Here's one bumper that actually points you in a diagonal direction, but you can't see that angle in the prototype version. So I'm playing it, I'm like, oh, like I get on this thing and fly off to the side. Here's some content from a volcano level. Again, same thing, tons of details, basically just not there yet. Here's an ice/mountain level. This enemy placeholder is amazing. I cannot get enough of this. I love it. I just eat this stuff up. And look at this fish. It's so basic, it's so silly. When I was playing the retail version, I saw this snowball and I'm like, I need to redo this level in the prototype version because I just got to see what the snowball looks like. It kind of became a game for me where it's like, oh, that's cool. I wonder what they did for that earlier on. Now, speaking of silly, let's take a look at the bosses. Please redraw me. So awesome. Just so cool. And comparing it to the finished product, obviously, much more detail. In the main Pac-Man Pac Village, or whatever it's called, there are a number of different houses that you can go into, and in the retail version, some of the houses you go into and you have a minigame. So it's kind of like just sort of a Pac-Man variant minigame. In the prototype version, you can play 2 of these, and one of them has steps. Like it actually has different elevation. And you can see the animation's a little bit funky as he goes up and down. But in the retail version, there was no minigame that actually had any sort of elevation. So this seemingly is a minigame they just scrapped, never utilized for the final cut. So those are just some of the differences. We could go on forever. But wrapping up here, I wanted to give a big thank you to Andrew for once again allowing us to borrow one of his prototypes. Really appreciate it. He sends us a lot of content that I can then showcase to all of you guys. So if you enjoyed this episode and you want to support the show, we do have a Patreon and a Spreadshirt t-shirt store. I'll put links in the description below. But otherwise, just leaving a like and a comment is awesome. We certainly appreciate it. And if you have a hankering for more hardcore games, I'm going to make a suggestion. We did a Night Trap video last week. That's probably one of my favorite episodes. Super silly, super very funny, just an awesome, fun episode. If you haven't checked it out, definitely do so. And aside from that, we will see you all next time. Cheers. Thank you again for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like and a share, and we will see you guys next time.